you're feeling better.
Yep.
And I had asked, why? What's going on?
Well, there's several things I've considered. One is that the new medicine they put me on is kicking in and allowing me to be a little more balanced.
Mm-hmm. It's more stable.
Right.
Not so many super highs, not so many super lows.
Right. Another thing is that they were paging me. Another thing is that I seem to do these high-low swings, and I haven't been sleeping as well. So I don't know if maybe I'm on one of the high swings. The other thing is that an acquaintance, he wasn't really a friend, but someone that I knew, and he died, and I assumed that he died of a heart attack. He was a pretty big guy, 60, but he committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, his death, for one thing, really brought me to my knees, but then to find out that he had committed suicide and was a person that just seemed happy all the time,
Mm-hmm.
that really got me. So
you probably thought he was more likely to die of a heart attack than suicide. Mental illness?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, well, the heart attack or any physical ailment is nothing compared to someone who feels hopeless and is miserable, and you could relate to that.
Yep.
I could see where that would be like, oh, why aren't people more afraid of the mental health issues that are underlying all of this stuff?
Right.
So what you in terms of like the healthy body or, the thinness, if what it takes to be healthy or thin is mental illness, depression, isolation, obsessive compulsiveness, do you really want it? Especially if it comes at the cost of your life, meaning your just freedom in life.
Yep.
How much of your depression is directly related to the pressure to lose weight?
Right.
A lot of it.
Absolutely.
For health.
Especially as my weight has climbed and
well, and don't you agree the weight climbing is a consequence of continued mental health issues? Like, it's like that's like the what's the word? The consequence. Those are all just
right.
It's not the problem underneath it all. That's like just it's a physical symptom. It's not the problem. It's a sign that there's something underneath all of it that needs to be addressed.
Exactly.
Anyways, you were saying that you feel a little bit less hopeless too.
Right. Yeah. Just like feeling like I just haven't really taken responsibility for my feelings, maybe.
You mean like looking at those feelings that you might be having and trying to understand where they're coming from, what beliefs you might have, or the thoughts? Is that what you're saying? Like you haven't really looked at them?
Yes.
That's understandable. I know for me, when I was prior to recovery, I just never questioned my feelings. They were just facts. Right?
Yeah.
You never think, maybe my feelings aren't fact. That makes sense?
Right.
Feelings aren't necessarily factual. Doesn't mean you don't have the feeling, but maybe feelings are and circumstances. They come from a belief. right? Anyways.
Right. Yeah, and kind of like everything that you thought you knew, now you don't know. And I know we've talked about this multiple times over the last several months, but it just really, I don't know, it's just like really sinking in and
that's
causing me to rethink everything.
I could see why that would give you a sense of hope too, because if the, you know, like the outcome of your mental health, the outcome of how you've been suffering is based on those beliefs. Well, if those beliefs aren't true, maybe they need to be questioned. That means that there's hope that you could change the outcome.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Can you see why that would give you a sense of hope? Yeah, the apathy and hopelessness often comes from the fact that you cannot perceive or conceive of anything different. Like, how can you change, you know, the example I use is myself with, you know, religious indoctrination and dogma. If you believe those as fact, like dogma, unquestionable truths, then can you see how from that point of view, there is no way to change your life, right? In terms of like when I ended up having premarital sex, that is a sin. That's like a deadly sin in terms of what I was taught. Or not everybody teaches that, but that's what I was taught. And if I don't question that belief, if I don't have my own, you know, if I'm not allowed to question it, then when that happens, there's no way I can rewind that sin. Does that make sense? So without changing that belief, I'm left to permanently feel scarred, damaged, sinful, like there's no hope, right? Can you see where in that state of mind it would be hopeless? You're ruined.
Yeah.
So how do you change the what feels catastrophic, unrewindable? It cannot be changed. It is what's the word? Irreparable, right?
Yeah.
Irreparable damage forever. It feels then the goal you originally set out to reach feels pointless, hopeless, lost. It's like you're going to live in permanent loss because the only thing you're aware of is the fantasy and hope for this and the fact that you've irreparably damaged your chances.
Yeah.
And that's where it feels hopeless. So in terms of your body image and your health, right? I'm aspiring to this, and at this point, I've irreparably damaged my body. So I feel horrible about who I am. I feel like I am, it's like being swallowed up into the ocean.
Yeah.
Can you see where the eating then would become even a bigger deal? And every time you eat, you feel worse about yourself. So it snowballs into this kind of addictive behavior. It's not an addiction. I mean, it's really just a shame-filled, irreparably damaged-filled pressure to fix everything. Feels overwhelming, like getting sucked into the ocean.
Yep.
So when you question those beliefs, so when you question those beliefs about, let's just use body image or religious ideology, all of a sudden it's like, it is kind of disorienting.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, you're not aware when you're raised in a totalitarian environment, like you have.
Yeah.
Do you see that now? Like you have been so isolated from any alternative.
Yeah.
That maybe that has, and not only that, but it's been in that totalitarian environment, worshipped as the best. You're told it's the best.
Yeah.
So can you see then why, too, with that, your lack of perspective, because you've only had one, and the fact that it's praised as the most, the most important, valuable, like only way of living, why then it would feel hopeless when that way of living is miserable. It is dark and it's just horrible, right? You're taught this is supposed to be trapped. But it's supposed to be glamorous, and there are certain things that you get out of it. Again, it's like living in a commune, like a cult commune that it's blissful, it's happy, we're all like so happy and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, everybody's suffocating, super controlled, super managed. You're only accepted if you are perfect and follow every single thing you're told to perfection. Yeah. So when you kind of take a step out of it and you look at, how you were raised, the environment you've been in, the fact that you've been isolated, you haven't had a different job, you've only worked for your family, you've only worked for your dad, you've never been exposed to something different than that. Body image was massive. Thin supremacy is in that system that you've been raised in. Misogyny, male dominance, right? Female's role. Very patriarch environment. Again, it's like, it's not all bad. It's not all bad.
Right.
And that's part of the problem. Wouldn't it? Yeah. It would have been easier for you to be like, quit a long time ago if it was all bad.
Right. And so that's kind of what I am, is figuring out, given all of that, where do I fit in, and or not necessarily where do I fit in, but where will I set my boundaries?
Mm-hmm. Because you're not necessarily going to leave the environment or the people. Right?
Right, because there's parts of it that I really like.
Of course. That's why I'm not saying it's all or nothing. Like, I didn't leave my family.
Right.
I didn't leave. I just didn't necessarily internalize the religion the same way. And I didn't need to tell anybody. Especially when I knew that they would have had to have gone through the same mental illness and death and just all of what I had to go through to have an awakening from it, right? It took me massive amounts of suffering and mental health problems and suicidal tendencies and horrible, complex PTSD to come out of it, to see, oh, that's brainwashing. That's a, totalitarian approach to religion. It's the same as a totalitarian government. Same thing. Right? Except for it's not my country government. It's the way that this religion governs is through totalitarianism. And not all of it is bad. But the good things? Those good things? Just so you know. Those are just good things that come from everybody. Like in a battered wife situation where the battered wife says, oh, but he's so kind, as if there's no other man that has kindness.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Oh, but sometimes he's so sensitive. Like, he owns sensitivity. So these are human qualities that no one can patent. Right? Yeah. So, but when you go into your logic, does it make sense if you're basically running this business to just exit when your dad ultimately isn't even, he may be psychologically gripping and controlling and full of drama and codependency and narcissism and abusiveness, but what is he really doing at this point?
Not a lot.
No.
And like this morning, they've been out of town. He called to, he said, I missed a call yesterday, and I said, well, I needed to talk to Mom yesterday. And he said, well, we didn't have good cell reception, so what did you need? I said, I needed to talk to Mom. And he said, well, what about? I said, I needed to talk to Mom. Well, but I need to know what it was about. I said, no, I needed to talk to Mom. Well, you're not answering my question. I I needed to talk to Mom. And I just thought, like, gosh, like, why? I mean, that's like complete control.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
I didn't know what you were calling about. And I almost told him, but I thought, no, this is part of that boundary setting that, you know, once it's like having a toddler, and if you give in once, they never forget that, and they never stop their.
No, and then they have tantrums, and they'll break things, and then they'll throw something at you and tell you it's your fault. That you're not telling them what they want. Yeah, totally.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, it's just.
Did it help last week when we talked about him, or a couple of weeks ago when we talked about him as, you know, truthfully, mentally unfit, completely unfit? I know we've talked about this at different times in our work together, but you, for whatever reason, you actually saw it clearly. Like, oh, if I keep on thinking he's credible and fit for the job, then I'm screwed, right? Because you have to always be submissive to him because he's the totalitarian dictator, right? Everything goes through him, and he's the one that picks and chooses everything, and you're all to be kneeling at his mercy.
Yeah. And that's where we were this morning was, you know, he wasn't getting his way. And he's not used to that. So I guess it's kind of a slow process figuring out where I want to fit in, where I want to, and where my boundaries are, and kind of what the next step is.
Mm-hmm. With your work environment?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, my husband's been a big help. You know, he'll say, okay, did you realize you just gave in to your dad? And now he thinks he's in control again.
Wow, that's awesome that your husband is actually helping.
Yeah.
As being supportive.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Because he knows that it would be really hard for me to walk away from this.
Mm-hmm.
And there are parts that I enjoy. And so he's been trying to help me figure out, like I just told him, I need you to come in once a day and just check in on me. And so until he got in the field, he was doing that. And, you know, we may just say a couple of things to each other, let them sit down and watch me work for a minute, and he goes back to work. And that's been very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Just the, I don't know, support or, and I just done a lot. You know, I'm very honest with the girls that I work with and what they don't have to put up with from my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they'll come to me and tell me now. So, okay.
Okay, so now your next focus is not feeling guilty about working 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not working 80 hours a week.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that, because what is guilt? What is that?
It's setting unrealistic expectations for myself.
Well, for there to be guilt, you have to believe it's realistic.
Okay, yeah.
The should statements. I should be working 80 hours a week. I should be able to do that. So do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
The belief isn't that it's unrealistic. The belief is that it is realistic and you are held to that as a realistic standard. And attached to that standard is this idea of I'm better than. So it's like this pride attached to it. So the guilt truthfully comes from probably a point in your life where you took pride in working that hard and that much, where it actually fulfilled a sense of value in yourself. Can you see then, if you're not working as much, why you would feel like inadequate? A sense of inadequacy would come from that. So you would have to remove the attached worth, the attached kind of fantasy to that 80-hour work week. You'd have to remove that from the condition of that many hours. So, in comparison, or as another example of this, is when I used to exercise, when I burned over 1,000 calories in less than an hour doing cardio, extreme radical cardio, I felt like I was the queen. Like, I'm freaking badass. I attached so much pride to that. Imagine what it felt like when I only did 20 minutes of exercise.
You felt like a failure.
Yeah, because the new standard of normalcy is 1,000 calories.
Yeah.
That's like someone feeling bad about eating too much when their norm, what they believe should be the norm, is 1,200 calories or less. So then they feel bad. I should be eating less. So one of the ways that I wrote about it in this book I'm about to publish, about this inflated idea of yourself as an actual survival mechanism. So don't feel bad about it. So the idea is that by attaching yourself to these kind of grandiose ideas, that's like saying you're attaching, or you're looking at what would be safe in the environment. So working 80 hours in the environment you were raised was safe and actually admonished and praised, right? Like, screw you guys. This is how many. It's like proof. You were proving yourself. So can you see then why, even if you're mentally ill because of it, doesn't matter. In fact, you'll take that like obsessive compulsiveness and depression and anxiety, and you'll say that's what it takes. You can't do it. You're inadequate. So the mental health problems that you were experiencing on the way to working that many hours and having to sustain that many hours, you never thought was a problem. It was just the sacrifices that everybody should make to get there, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I thought I wasn't strong enough. Like, I needed more fortitude to be able to get that done and not be affected.
Right. Fortitude equating to mental illness as fortitude. Yep. You know what I'm saying? See what I mean? So it's not like you're consciously doing that, though. It's this like perseverance. So what you're not realizing is you're taking this hyper-vigilant focus and praising it. When that hyper-vigilant focus is called obsession.
Yeah.
Obsession. You're obsessed. And you're praising that as like fortitude. I'm capable of eliminating everything else and not going here and not doing that. And I prioritize. So you've started to eliminate all of your life to have fortitude. Right?
Yep.
That is like saying, I'm willing to sacrifice everything to be thin. I won't go out. I'm not going to eat gluten or sugar. I'm going to eliminate all of it. I micromanage everything. I measure everything. I put everything in cups. I don't go. When I leave, I put everything in containers. You're not seeing that's mental ill. That's like not normal. That's a sign of obsessiveness. You're not comfortable with food. You're not seeing the reverse of that not looking at it from the outside. You're only doing it from the inside and feeling the safety you get from it, right? So this is one way to look at it. And all animals do this. Many animals do this, not all of them, but many animals have this mechanism. So do we. So, when a dog comes across something it's scared of often, or that feels threatening, you know how they have their hair standing up?
Yeah.
It's a way to look bigger than they actually are.
Oh, yeah.
Certain animals inflate themselves, puff up their feathers to make themselves look bigger than they actually are. Self-defense.
Yeah.
It's a way to say, look at me. La, 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 put their arms out. Ah. That's really not how their actual size, is it?
No.
But they like to think they're that big. Because if they're that big, if the truth is that they are as big as they're pooping themselves up to be, they're more likely to survive. So in a human, as you're inflating your capacity and you're inflating this idea of who you think you are, it's really coming from this fantasy of what you should be to survive. You'd have to inflate yourself to 80 hours a week to survive. Right? But the truth of the matter is that is the biggest lie, because in order to do that, you would have to suffer with extreme mental health problems and take antidepressants.
Right.
Because you have to do it. And even though it's not truthful about you, it isn't your natural capacity. So where does the guilt come from? The guilt comes from saying, I should be that amazing. Well, guess what? You're not. So guilt means you're refusing to accept the truth. You still believe the inflated idea is actually what we should be or what you should be. You haven't added to that the mental illness, right? Mm-hmm. So does that make sense what I'm saying? So you have this picture of what you should be and what you've in order to be, good or right or successful. So there's that 80-hour a week and whatever strictness you've added to that, or perfectionism you've added to it. But you didn't really include that in order for you to do that, because you could. That's a fact.
Yeah.
You could.
Yeah.
But to do that, you have to have mental illness. You cannot not have it. You have to eliminate all sorts of balance in your life and boundaries. So.
Yep.
So.
And that's what you said about that it's not my natural capacity.
Mm-mm.
That hits the nail on the head, and that is where my guilt lies.
You got it.
That
and
I don't have more capacity.
Yeah, so you're still holding this inflated idea as sacred, as like amazing.
Yeah.
Well, is it amazing if it requires someone have mental illness to do it, and they don't have time for family, and they don't have time for personal time, and they're obsessed, they have anything else, their whole life is reliant on that one thing.
Right.
Because that's what happens. You have no room for anything else. Nothing.
Yep.
So is that really something that should be praised?
No.
Do you see where what the missing part is? That you still praise it, but you haven't included. Look at anybody else, any human being out there. Take that much time away from anything else and devote it to one thing. See what I mean by totalitarian?
Yeah.
80 hours a week means you only have time to sleep.
Yeah. Yep.
Your whole life, you're a slave. That's what that means. That is slavery. And you're praising that. And feeling bad.
Yeah. Yeah, this morning I had to be late because I felt horrible this morning. I was just so tired. And and I told myself, it's just you can't keep this up. This is just, you don't have the capacity to do it. And then I felt terrible, but I was so.
And then you feel bad about yourself. You see where there's no what you're idolizing is, there's no you in it. There's no realness in it. Right? Think about it. There is no anything in it. It's just a concept that is rigid, that is totalitarian, that doesn't allow for people to have any sense of, there's no life in it. You're a slave.
Yeah.
And what's really sick about it is but what you get out of it. So that's why it's hard for you to let it go, is you get something out of that. And in order for you to let it go and not have this guilt, you'd have to give up what that 80-hour symbolizes for you.
Right.
So what does that symbolize?
I need to figure out what that is.
Well, all you got to do is think about it. It's not like you have to figure it out. It doesn't take figuring out. You just have to sit, think, and feel, and it shows up.
Yeah.
Just think about, if you were to attain that, what does it feel like?
Success.
All right,
And
so if it's success,
equality with the men I work with.
Proving yourself.
Yeah.
Is it equality or better than?
Not better than, no.
Okay, it's just I'm just as much as capable. Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what if, let that go now. Like, it's gone. It's not true. It's all a lie anyways. So let's let it go.
Yeah,
So you're not successful. So is it embarrassing? Like, what's it feel like to accept that you are not successful?
It feels like I am not meeting the expectations set for me.
And you're not. And you're not. Just keep on going. You're not. That's the truth. So just face it. You're not. What's that feel like?
That I don't deserve the positions I've been put in.
And
like on the board I'm on, and the position here at work.
So if you were to hire someone for this position, would you expect them to work 80 hours a week?
No, that makes me so bad.
Why wouldn't you expect someone else to work 80 hours a week?
Because it's hard on people.
You mean it's cruel? It's like cruel, right?
Yeah.
Like they're your slave.
Yeah. Yeah, and you don't have a life.
Yeah, think what it would take for you to expect someone else. Think what it would take in your mind to be okay and expect someone else to do that, and then to shame and guilt them when they don't.
I'd have to be an asshole.
Oh, or mentally ill. Like psychotic, right? Like so narcissistically grandiose that you don't even give a shit. Total lack of compassion. There's no humanity in it. You would have to be you see what I mean by psychotic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you're feeling like you should be that way, you're that psychotic. That's psychotic. So that expectation is psychotic. It's inhumane.
It's like punishing myself.
Well, I mean, unless you meet the expectation.
Yeah.
So the whole concept of holding yourself to that expectation is psychotic. Can you see then why you would have mental health issues if you hold yourself to that psychotic standard? Just see it as standards. These are just numbers and standards. They don't include any, there's no inclusion around human psychology and well-being and life, and there's none of that is included in those expectations.
Yeah.
Right? So how are you going to release yourself from those expectations? Well, the reason you hold yourself to them is because you want what you think you'll get out of it. So you'd have to give up what you think and it doesn't matter if you're consciously aware of how messed up it is. It certainly helps to see that you would never expect anybody to do this. You wouldn't teach this. You would never promote this. It's horrendous and you're clearly failing. You're failing at it. Can you see that? Like, you really don't. You're not doing it.
Yeah.
And if you were to do it, you're going to lose your mind. So it's not natural for you. So you are failing. Based on that belief, you're a failure. You're not good enough. Based on that concept. That is psychotic. Keep in mind. You are worthless. So in order for you to set yourself free from this belief, what do you have to accept?
That I'm a failure. I'm not capable of doing it.
You got it. You have to go where you have to accept what you don't want. You're a failure. Accept it. If you can't accept that, you're never going to be set free. Because do you see that clearly? You cannot accept the fears that you have of being seen as a failure or inadequate, or that you're not good enough, or you have no proof, or men are better than you. And if you can't accept those fears and go into them, you will always, always, always live in suffering trying to prove otherwise, because you cannot accept those things. But if you just accept those things because they're factual, it's true. When you see the truth is the truth, if you're still unwilling to just admit those truths, then you're choosing to suffer at that point.
Right.
Because I cannot accept the truth and I cannot tell the truth, I have to live in this lie. And living in that lie means you are crazy messed up.
Yeah, I completely see it.
That's the only way to give yourself grace. You got to give that. You have to accept all the fear thoughts that arise. What if I'm not good enough? What if I am inadequate? Well, what if you are, in fact, inadequate?
Well, I am.
Okay. So.
Yeah, I am.
Right. Is that something that should define you as worthless?
No.
You can say that all you want, but the only way for it to become real is for you to see that the expectations you're being held to are psychotic, demonic, demented. They're horrible, inhumane, torture. If that's what it takes for your business to succeed, sounds like it's a shitty business that wouldn't succeed in reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I have I have so much compassion and forgiveness around the people I work with. Like, for instance, one made a $20,000 mistake, and I was like, it's okay. We'll work it out. We'll get through it. We'll figure it out. And we ended up getting it down to like $1,900. And I completely understand that stuff happens, and it doesn't do any good to yell and scream, and you should know better. But I have problems having that compassion for myself, and it goes back to I'll let my dad down.
Yeah, it really comes down to you believing this business is a symbol of your worth as a human being. So it goes.
And I don't want that.
Yeah, this is where I would say, actually, of course, that's probably where it started as a child. But the truth of the matter is, you formed a self-concept of who you are based on how you perform in this business. So you don't define everybody else by it. You're not defining that person and who she is and her worth as a human being based on how she works. You're not. You're doing that to yourself because you've identified, you've created, and this is what happens when people live in totalitarian environments. You're not special when it comes to this mechanism, right?
Right.
That's why you shouldn't feel bad. It's like this was how you defined who you are. When you think of who you are in your mind, it is wrapped into this business.
Yeah.
So even if your dad died, to be honest with you, he just died, you would still hold yourself to this shit. Because it's your identity at this point. It's not his. It's yours. And you're doing it to yourself.
Yeah.
So he's not the one saying you have to work 80 hours. It's not for him anymore. You're doing it because you believe you should do that for the business.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm trying to help you see is, how are you going to get out of this? Well, you have to actually open yourself up to what would happen if this business went away. Because ultimately, if you don't work that much, the fear underneath it is that it's going to fail.
Right.
If you were to die, let's just say you commit suicide. I'm pretty sure the business would be just fine. It'd be just fine without you.
Yeah.
You have a heart attack. Things will be rearranged and everything will just work fine.
Yeah.
You're the one living in your own. You're the one living in solitary confinement, dearie.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure no one would take your role living in solitary confinement. Who's going to live in that dark room that Michelle lived in before she killed herself? Or had a heart attack? Or had an aneurysm? You know, your dad's going to demand someone else do it. Your dad's going to say your son has to do it now to prove that he's worth, he can handle it. You want him to go into the solitary confinement room of mental illness?
No.
I'm pretty sure you don't have to do that. But the crazy thing is, because you believe that that's what you've had to do for this business to succeed, for you to leave solitary confinement, it would be an act of saying, I'm willing for this to fail. Because you actually believe that you have to stay in this solitary confinement. You don't know anything else. So it feels as if you leave that space, everything is going to fail. In order to leave that space, you have to be willing. You just have to be willing to let it fail. Does it mean that it's a guaranteed fail? No, but your willingness to say, you know what, if it does fail, I would rather this business fail than to die. My life and the value of my life is more important to me than this business. So do you see how eventually your self-concept and life have to separate from the business? There has to be a separation of the two. The only way that separation is going to happen is if you realize that you're dying to keep this business alive. So if you want to stay alive, so you have a life, you have to be willing to let the business die. It's just a willingness to say what's more important here. The problem is you've entangled your identity in life with the business as if they're the same thing.
Yeah.
So does this mean you have to, abandon the business? No. It doesn't. You have abandoned solitary confinement in the business. If it requires that the lead business owners have mental illness, you realize that means that your business sucks. Like it wouldn't work. It's not a naturally, it's like it's run off of slavery. So if you remove the slavery, that's the truth of the actual business. It doesn't naturally run well. It requires people have horrible mental illness for it to run. That's a sign it's not naturally sustaining. So just follow me here, because I'm talking to your fear. That's what I'm talking to. I'm not talking to the facts of the business. Your fear is such that if you don't work this hard, it's going to fail.
Right.
So that's what I'm talking to. Your crazy dream. Because that's what we have to negotiate with. We're not negotiating with your logic here. We're negotiating with this feeling that you have to work this much and do that much, and then you have guilt because you don't. That's what we're negotiating with. 80 hours a week. Holy shit.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's when I first thought Mark died of a heart attack. And it really got me because I thought, well, if I'm trying so hard to make sure the business is successful and I kill myself, literally, then somebody else will have to do it anyway. So what's the difference if I back off now and let people do things?
Yes.
And
you got it.
Yeah.
But you need to process through. I would agree with you. That is actually very healthy thinking. The idea that if I die, I'm going to die. So what's the risk of me backing off and letting other people do their job? Yes. I wish I had like fireworks to say, yay, she's getting it. Oh my God, yes. But the fact that you're holding guilt tells me that you haven't fully surrendered the ego attachment to those ideas. You haven't forgiven or really understood the gravity of what you've expected of yourself. You haven't truly witnessed or given yourself a distance to see that you have remained in solitary confinement. Thinking that, because don't you agree, 80 hours a week, just sitting in a room, for example.
Yeah.
How's that sound?
It's kind of lonely.
Well, that's what it feels like, even though, like, for me, solitary confinement was researching diets, studying metabolism, exercising for 2 hours, writing down every micromanaged information about the food I ate, measuring it, and then every time I failed that, then going into these ravaged binges that were fun and euphoric only because I knew I was going to purge and then I'd start over. I mean, that was my day all day long. Sounds like solitary confinement, doesn't it? That's it.
Yeah.
Those are your walls. That's it. That's all you think about. That's all you study. You're obsessing over the freaking minutia in the details of the wall because you're in solitary confinement. And you can't leave because if you leave, everything will come crashing down.
Right.
So you stay there and you're going cuckoo. Cuckoo!
Yeah.
Eventually, you have to leave. You have to face what you're afraid will happen. That's the only alternative you have. If I stop what I'm doing, if I let all of this go, the only reason I'm doing all of this is because I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of this, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's safety in solitary confinement. You're safe, but let me tell you, everything you're doing for 80 hours and more, because, you know, every time you feel guilty, that's still added to the hours of work. All of that's included in the insanity. I should be doing that. Oh my God, I'm not. And then the anxiety that wells up, it builds. If you're feeling guilty, you have anxiety still. You're probably still eating because of that. You know what I mean? You're still, even though you're not doing anything, you still are in solitary confinement. You're just, you know, it's like being paralyzed in it now.
Right.
Or you've left solitary confinement and you're trying to recreate it in a different way. It's just, again, the guilt is part of the actual, that means you're still believing you should be doing this. You should be in that dark room and you're not and you feel bad. So you still psychologically are literally 80 hours a week being controlled by the idea you should be in that space.
Right, yeah. Agree.
So my suggestion and what I'm directing you to do right now is to face what feels permanent. It's going to feel permanent, what I'm telling you to do. Like if I stop and I do it because I can see that what I'm doing is basically denying the truth. I'm denying what I'm afraid of. But that fear is always there, that this is a failure. So what if it is a failure and everything I'm doing is just like trying to hold the pieces together and I'm losing my shit holding the pieces together? If you can't accept failure, you cannot stop what you're doing.
Yeah.
Are you following me?
Yeah, that's the absolute. Yeah.
So by accepting failure, that doesn't mean it's going to fail. It just means that you're willing to allow it to fail if that is the truth. It is because you don't know the truth. You're just going off of fears.
Yeah, that is the truth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the only way to let it go is to actually be willing for it to fail. Because that's what it will feel like to let go or to leave that solitary confinement. To say, I will never again expect myself to work that much. By surrendering those beliefs and those concepts of work ethic, it's going to feel that's the solitary confinement, is the work ethic. Wouldn't you agree? That's what keeps you in solitary confinement, is the ethics that you set for your work, for you. So when you let those go, first of all, you might feel like you don't know how to work. You don't know what boundaries are. So there's that.
Yeah.
But but you do know this: you will never be a slave that way again to anything, right?
Yeah.
All of this requires for you to let it go. You have to face what your fears are saying, because your only reason you're holding yourself to this degree of work is because of those fears. And those fears are large and they're big. So can you see, because of how much the amount of fear and terror that you believe will happen, that's basically a good way of calculating how much work you have to do. It's a reflection of that. So I saw that in me. It was like, I'm that afraid of gaining weight, therefore I have to do that amount of work. Right? To me, gaining weight was failure.
Yeah.
So I had to do all this work that was driving me crazy. It was literally making me batshit crazy, the amount of work I was doing. So eventually, as I fatigued in that work and the insanity of having to do all that work, I was left with the only alternative, which is I let all this work go and my fear will arise. The fear that all of this work is repressing, or I kill myself. But to face those fears, it's like identical to killing yourself. I mean, you might as well just face the fears, because at least with facing those fears, you're assuming, you're making an assumption. So the willingness to face them, at least there might be an alternative. Whereas facing a gun to your head or slitting your wrist, that's like guaranteed you're going to die. That's a guaranteed your relief. But you really haven't learned anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like with your friend, all he might have needed to do is admit failure, quit his job, and start over.
Yeah. And somebody actually said that. You think with the new regulations coming to his business, he thought it was going to fail and he couldn't handle it?
Could have been. Well, you can have a lot of compassion for that. I mean, if he had no sense of, and who knows really, but in the end, I know for me, the willingness to commit suicide, it was because I didn't know anything else. And the only alternative, I didn't know how to not be this way. And it was terrorizing to let it go. Terrorizing. So I was so miserable that suicide felt relieving doing what I was doing. So it was that bad. But I refused to stop doing what I was doing because I was afraid of the terror of what would happen if I stopped. So my first instinct was to kill myself. But then I realized, oh, well, why don't I just face this terror? I had a moment of clarity, okay? A moment of clarity. I'm very fortunate.
I actually am having physical sensations of dizziness thinking about jumping off that ledge.
Well, it feels like panic. It is terror. It is going, I mean, just imagine how much work you've done. That is pretty much how much terror is underneath all of it. It's a lot. I felt physically, so to leave solitary confinement, to surrender everything I was doing, all of this work, to stop it all. The funny thing is, when I look back, it's like, oh, doing all that work was so hard. It was torture, right? It was absolute torture. Letting it go was easy because you do nothing. You literally do nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
That's true.
But psychologically, it is full of terror. So doing nothing actually is allowing the terror to arise. And it's like, this was the first time for me I really felt like I understood what faith was. I'd always been taught about faith that if you do the right things and you work and you have faith, blessings will arise. So it was always in context around being told, do what you're told and have faith, you'll get the reward. There was always this linear component to it. You know, you work and you have faith. This was the opposite. Because that concept is so biased towards, you know, you work your butt off here, you do what God tells you, you follow the rules, you stay in control and have faith that when you die, you're going to go to heaven or you're going to get blessings. That's like doing a vision board and saying, I want the big house and I want the thin body and the big boobs and the husband that takes care of me. And I have faith, you know, super brainwashed. It's always this magical outcome, right?
Yeah.
So this was very different because I was essentially saying, there was one clarity. So it felt like terror, like the Grim Reaper was going to kill me, right? And so that's why I stayed in my controls, inside my solitary confinement in my controls, right? So I realized this terror that felt like murder that had been there since I was a child. I just grew and grew and grew. I didn't have words to describe it, but looking back, I can go, oh, I had that as a child. That's why I had so much anxiety in school, and I panicked, and I had ADHD, and I had all these behavioral problems. It was all trying to get rid of that anxiety. Well, if it's been chasing me my whole life, and I am denying it, I'm repressing it. Well, if it is meant to be, if this is God's will that I'm going to die, well, no wonder I'm in hell, because I'm trying to change God's will. I'm arguing with God. And it became very apparent to me that if the truth is that I am to die and that is the will for my life, that I have to accept that as truth. Either that or I have to stay in hell trying to deny it. I'm not ready to die yet, you know? So it was a life and death decision for me because I was going to commit suicide anyways. And it was that humongous. It was like, it feels like I'm going to die. It physically manifests through all this physiology. My hair stands on end. My throat feels like it's closing in. I can't breathe. I'm having hot flashes and cold sweats, and my heart is beating out of my chest. I mean, it's physically manifesting that I am going to die. The Grim Reaper is here, and my soul is about to go into this vortex, this black hole of non-existence. I had to accept that if that is the will of God, I have to accept it. Otherwise, I'm going to live in torment and torture, like a tortured soul in Dante's Inferno, forever.
Yeah.
I know that sounds pretty gloomy, but that was the facts for me.
No, it doesn't sound gloomy. I get it.
That's what it feels like. So I'm going to step out of solitary confinement and open myself up to the will of God. Now let's talk about faith for a second. Now let's talk about faith. Because faith was not that I would survive. It was that I could handle it. The truth.
Yeah.
That the truth was, if I'm to die, that I accept it. And I have to have faith that I can I accept it. So the faith was just the courage to face it. That's it. To face the truth. No matter how freaking hard you work, when death calls, maybe you should have faith that you can accept it. Yeah, I don't know if that really comes across very well, but let me tell you, I've never experienced any form of faith before that, and I've never been asked to accept that much faith after that since. And it really is just acceptance. And you just have faith that you can handle it. And you don't even know what handling it is.
Right.
It's like facing the Grim Reaper. It's like standing there passively as a tiger is running towards you. It's like being walked up to the guillotine and accepting you're about to get beheaded without a fight. That's what it feels like. It's like leaving solitary confinement, the safety and insanity of solitary confinement, in a dark cave to actually go into the wilderness. You don't even know what's out there. This was like jumping off of a cliff that literally has haze over the top, so you don't even know where it goes. You're either going to fall to your death or you're going to land on something you don't even know exists yet.
And it might be a great big gigantic soft pillow.
You don't know, but the only way to jump is not to have faith that it's a big pillow. Remember? You can handle death, because to jump, it requires you accept that you can fall to your death. The worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And you just have faith that you can handle what the truth is. It's the truth. And if that's what you're asked to do, you're going to do it. And you just accept the truth. Yeah. And you don't have any foresight around what it is. That's where the faith comes in. It's just that whatever it is, you can handle it. You handled this. You handled 80-hour work weeks. Those are easy.
I handled the death of a child.
You've handled a shit ton. But now you're being asked to do nothing. Can you handle that? Can you handle the loss? Right? Can you handle failure? So ask that. Can I handle failure? If my natural way of working, that is humane, that is graceful, it doesn't mean you don't want to work. It just means that you're being humane with yourself. If that's not good enough, do you want to be what is?
Right.
No. Me neither. I'd rather just be the real me and let things fail and work naturally. Let things fail and work naturally within my natural scope of capacity. I'm willing for people to judge me. I'm okay with that, right? So the willingness to be judged, the willingness to be seen as a failure, that's pride that holds people back from just saying, hey, I failed my job. So you just look at this guy who committed suicide. What if he was going to fail? Well, was he embarrassed that people would think he was a bad person? I mean, he would rather kill himself than be embarrassed. Which one's worse? I mean, this is where I went. I'm the only one that knows. When I went through this, I'm the only one that knows, first of all, how much I've suffered. Second of all, that the alternative was suicide. So I'm going to quit college. I'm leaving my husband to go back to this other university. I'm leaving a full ride scholarship. Everybody around me is going to think I have lost my shit. I'm okay. Because they don't know that the alternative is suicide. And I don't really need their approval anyways. Do I need their approval not to kill myself? Do I need to tell them that I was going to kill myself? Do I need approval? Do I need validation from them? Or can I just validate myself? I'm the one that was going to commit suicide. I'm the one that needs to validate that this is the right thing to do. Well, at this point, when it comes to your suffering, there's no one else who's experienced it this way within your space, right? Like you've never experienced my suffering. I've never experienced your suffering. But I can have compassion for your suffering because to me, suffering is suffering, Right. So, you're the only one that can only speak for yourself. I'm over here speaking from my experience, from my suffering, and what I did to deal with it, and to escape it, and to surrender it, and to, accept the failures. And, I'm telling you my processing, and you can process it differently. But you're the only person that really fully understands what you're afraid of, what has to be faced, what that terror feels like. You're the only one experiencing that terror to the degree, to the intensity. You're the only one that knows when it comes up, where it happens, and how. And remember when you said at the beginning of this hour, I need to take responsibility for my emotions. Yes, you do, because you're the only one that experiences them. There's no person on the planet, your mom, your dad, your husband, your children, they cannot fill that void. They can't. It's not their job to protect you. Your job can't do it either. So it's not just other people. Body image can't make that better. You're still avoiding the truth. You're still trying to hide from your fears. So when you stop trying to hide and you allow the fear to come up and you allow yourself to actually experience the physical sensation of fear. There is a physical sense of what it feels like, but it's just a physical sense. Fear is much easier than nausea, being hungover. For reals. It's just heart palpitations, and it's a physical sense, but you have to be willing to sit in it. You have to be willing to just accept it and allow it to run its course. It's not your job to run the course of that. If you take ownership of it, you're still arguing with God and you're saying, it's my will, not yours.
God, that is so true.
Well, so what do you have to do if you want to be released from this?
Accept failure and let it go.
Surrender your will. Yes.
Yeah.
And you accept what comes up. You accept all the fear thoughts that arise, because there's going to be all sorts of threats. You can't handle it. Your husband's going to leave you. No one's going to love you. You're going to be all alone. You're going to be living in the wilderness. Well, it's either that or suffer. I don't know which one's worse.
Right.
You're the only one that can compare those two in your minds. I know for me, I'd rather be alone in the wilderness forever. I'd rather die of starvation in the wilderness. I'd rather get bit by a snake and get eaten by a bear. That would be so much easier. It's like a psychological suicide. It truly is. It's not a physical suicide. It's psychological. And it feels that way.
Yeah.
To let it all go. But if the facts are the facts, if your fear is that your business is going to fail, you have to face that fear and accept the, reality, so that, and or just be willing to see what what happens. Because you're just not willing,
Right.
It's so easy. Snap, snap, snap. Say that again.
I can't wait to listen to this one.
It's a good one in the end, at least. But yeah, I'm laughing. I'm joking about that. It's easy in the fact that this is the first time that you'll do nothing. But it's also the first time that you're going to actually allow those feelings and those fears to arise. And by doing nothing, it takes courage. And because there is no way to control it. You're allowing, it's like saying the facts to arise. I like to think of it as the will of God. It is the, and I know a lot of people don't believe in God. I don't care. It's just like, it's reality manifesting. It's like, if this was the will of the life that I'm living, I'm denying it, and therefore I have to suffer trying to not make it happen. But let me tell you, this tsunami wave is going to kill you. Eventually, it is going to win.
Yeah.
So you can either, dedicate your whole goddamn life to denying the truth, or you can just accept the truth so you can be free. You're free after that. You do what you want. After that, you have your freedom. Your whole life won't be dedicated to trying to prevent that tsunami wave. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it does feel kind of like this wave that builds and builds and builds, and then it's too big.
Yeah. Okay.
You have a headache yet? You tired yet?